Welcome to Transform Your Workplace. This is the show where we explore the latest trends and strategies to help you create a great workplace. I'm your host, Brandon Laws, and today's episode is brought to you by Xenium HR, your go-to resource for HR consulting and payroll services. Learn more about Xenium at xeniumhr.com. I'm excited to share an in-person conversation I had with Terry Beard, the author of We Owe Each Other 2 Minutes, Transform Your Life Through Public Speaking. In this conversation, Terry and I dove deep into the importance of finding your voice, not just in public speaking, but in every facet of life and work. We discussed how overcoming speech anxiety can lead to personal growth, stronger connections, and even transform your workplace culture. Terry shared a lot of compelling stories from his own journey, including how he went from delegating speaking opportunities due to fear to helping others discover their voices through groups like Toastmasters and the Speakers Alliance. We also talked about creating safe spaces where people feel comfortable expressing themselves, which is, I believe, crucial for leaders and teams. Like me, if you've ever felt nervous about speaking up or want to empower your team to communicate more effectively, this episode is perfect for you. And before we dive in, I'd love for you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with a friend or colleague who might benefit from it. And make sure that you connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't connected with me already. I love continuing the conversation there with you as well. I love hearing what you want to learn about and how it's impacting you and your workplace culture. All right, now let's get into my interview with Terry Beard. Terry, it's a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. And we're doing this in person, too. It's really good to have you.
Oh, great. Thank you.
We are going to talk about your book. We're going to talk about public speaking. And it goes beyond just public speaking. It goes around people finding their voice. And I think it's really important even for just contributor-level employees, leaders of organizations to really craft their voice. And how did you get into this? I know you've been doing this a long time. I think you said 25 years. What inspired you to get into public speaking and write the book as well?
Well, it's interesting because I had a company in Portland, Oregon that started many, many years ago. And I also have 2 sons. And I knew that I needed to lead the company, which had a lot of opportunities for me to get up and speak. And I delegated all the speaking opportunities. So rather than say that I have speech anxiety or glossophobia, the fear of public speaking, I would just delegate. And come to find out that I knew that that wasn't quite right. But I also have 2 sons, and both of them, I'm very proud to say today, both have their voices, and they're both accomplished public speakers. They're very comfortable speaking, giving presentations. And that was the impetus. And then I had a gentleman who took me by the hand and took me to Dale Carnegie speaking seminars. And after Dale Carnegie speaking seminars, I said, I'm liking this. I think I'll do Toastmasters. So I did Toastmasters for a while. Many, many years, in fact. And then a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, a group of us started another group called the Speakers Alliance. So I found this to be a great opportunity not only to further my experience and my ability to speak, but everybody around me, because I'm finding that 70 to 80%, that can be documented, people have speech anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big number, and we don't talk about it in society.
No.
Except when we go to a birthday party or we go to a bar mitzvah or we go to a celebration of life. I hope they don't call on me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel it myself sometimes where when I joined our senior leadership team 3-4 years ago, I didn't realize how much speaking I'd be doing. I'm like, I'm comfortable behind a microphone like this, but when you're like called upon to like give an update in front of 100 people or like that, you know, it makes me nervous. I even see, like, I have, you know, the wearable technology and I see my heart rate going up in an instant because I'm just not comfortable with it. And for me, at least, it's more of like, I need reps and I need to craft like my delivery. And I'm sure that you've seen that with a lot of people.
Oh, yes. Even with myself, and I see it with other people.
So how'd the book come about?
Well, my older son lives in Del Mar, California, just north of La Jolla. And a couple of years ago, we were walking the beach, and a gal that he was with for 8 years passed away. She had breast cancer. And I said, this is pretty tough stuff. And he said, yeah, it's very, very tough stuff. I said, will you be in touch with her family? And he said, well, I don't know. He said, it's really interesting. He said, the last 6 of 8 years that I was with her, all we did was we went to the doctors and to the clinics. He said, but Dad, you're on the right track. You're helping people find their voices. But some of the family members, even though they didn't want to get up and give a speech, they could have said, Jeff, thank you very much for all that you did for our daughter. That's all they needed to say. We do owe each other 2 minutes. So that became the title to the book.
That's incredible. Unpack that for me. It's like we owe each other 2 minutes. Does that just mean like we need to allow the space for people to have their voice and to share that?
I remember 4 or 5 years ago, I went with my wife, Pascal, to a celebration of life. This gentleman was well into his 80s, Daryl, and he passed away. There's 200 people in the church, and it was time for people to get up and have a few words to say about Daryl and what he contributed to life. And nobody got up. And my wife looked at me and she said, I'm going up. You're number 2. And I thought, oh, okay. No excuses. You're next. So I thought, well, I understand what's going on. Nobody's getting up. So she got up, and she's a great speaker, had everybody laughing. So my turn to get up. I said, I met Daryl, didn't know him very well. But the one thing I know about Daryl is how well he made my wife feel. Because my wife's from Paris, and she likes to make chocolate mousse. And Daryl would always call on Easter Sunday and say, Pascal, we want you to come over. I know that you've been invited, but please bring me some chocolate mousse. That's a big bowl just for me. And I said, Daryl was always delighted to have Pascal come over and present her with the chocolate mousse. So I told that story, and then all of a sudden there was a lineup of people behind me. If he can do it, I can do it. And everybody in the place got up and started telling their stories.
I appreciate you sharing that. I had a moment this weekend. We had a great company party on the Portland Spirit boat in Oregon here, and we decided to try something different, and we did an annual party up there. Well, we do awards for employees, and we have a good time. We did a special thing for our EVP, Angela Perkins, who's been my colleague for 15 years, kind of side by side, and we were doing a secret toast. She didn't know about it, and our president, Ann, was going to give a speech, and then she's like, how about the rest of senior leadership team talk? And I'm like, like when you're not comfortable speaking, you start thinking about yourself with like, how am I going to feel? And the anxiety that I had leading up to that. But I was like, I gotta say something. She has been amazing, and I owe that to her. And I'm so glad I don't care what the heck I said or how I felt. She deserved it.
Exactly.
And I think it's hard to get over.
Well,
for
if we don't,
people.
we're going to live with regret.
100%. It's like it was left unsaid.
We're just adding more stress to stress.
Yeah, I know.
And that relieves stress.
Yeah.
And when we can tell a story, it's public speaking. And people like to hear stories. And they like to hear stories. It's not only celebration, but when you've overcome something.
Yeah.
That gets other people the opportunity to think, I can do it too.
One of the things I think about a lot is in our line of business, we're trying to help companies build great workplaces. And a lot of that starts with inclusion and belonging and all of those things. As a leader, I've recognized the need to be vulnerable and to share more so that way it connects us more. How much of like public speaking is like getting over or strengthening that vulnerability muscle to help tell stories and to connect people a little bit better?
I'll give you a short story.
Yeah.
I've written another book some 5 or 6 years ago called Squelched. And when I was in the 2nd grade, I was the leader, the MC, if you will, for K through 8 for several weeks over in Vancouver, Washington. And I would lead the group, and I really, really enjoyed it. And the Mother Superior came over and said, Terry, we're going to relieve you of this job because you're not a good boy on the playground. And I said, oh, okay. So the message I got was, I'm not good enough. So I sat down and never got up to speak until I was in my late 40s, early 50s. So I was squelched. That's the title of the book. A lot of us have been squelched, and we don't know that we've been squelched. But what that does, it tears up our self-esteem and our self-confidence. So any little residue that's left is what comes through in public speaking. So when I get up, I want to do a good job. But I'm not going to worry about what somebody's thinking about me or the judgment. So I'm not judging others. And I'm not caring if somebody's judging me. By letting all that judgment go away, then I just let it flow.
It's funny because I found this nugget in your book. The quote says, and I think this is what a thought running through your head says: "If they know the real me, they'll never approve. They'll never like me. I'm not good enough." That's the quote that you wrote in the book. And how did you get over that? Like I just don't. You can't flip it like a light switch.
Well, I was fortunate. I had somebody take me by the hand and introduce me to Toastmasters, and then we started this other group that I mentioned a little bit ago. But we don't have judgment. We don't have constructive criticism. We have 25, 35 people in our group, and people come from all over the place. Some people come in from Germany and Mexico on hybrid just to watch us and participate.
Wow.
And when you go into a safe harbor, a safe environment, people get up. We have people from 16 to 87 that belong in our group.
Wow. So getting up in front of 70 to 80 people every time?
Well, there's 16 years of age to 87.
Oh, I see. Age.
And there's 30, 35 people in the group. And
how fun.
What happens when people come in and they feel it's a safe environment, they get up and they talk, and we clap. Yeah. Everybody is validated. They sit down. And what we hear every week from different people, members and guests, that this is a fun place. This is a safe harbor. This is a good community. What we all are doing is we're having a good time. Isn't that what kids do?
Yeah, absolutely.
When we stop being a kid, we're not having fun. And we restore self-confidence. We're validated. We restore self-esteem. Then we feel good about ourselves, and then we feel better about others.
Yeah. It's interesting when I hear you say that you built this safe harbor inside of this group.
Yes.
Most organizations are trying to do the same thing. They say they want safety, like we call it psychological safety in the workplace, where you can show up, without being reprimanded for speaking up.
Yes.
How do organizations do that? It sounds like you probably had some agreements and some ground rules or values or some sort of North Star that allowed you to create that culture and possibly even have to hold people accountable as time went on, as new members joined.
Yes, and I think that sometimes I hear this and I see this all the time. Leadership courses are being directed by HR people that don't have their voices.
Yeah.
So they have an expectation that they don't even have of themselves. And if you want your kids to do it, you do it first. As my two sons found their voices, it's because they were watching me. I didn't say you must do this, but they saw me having more and more fun with it. So, of course, they want to try it too. But I think in corporations, it's no different than any organization or any community. When people feel good about themselves, they feel good about other people. And there's another thing that really adds to this safe harbor environment. There is no discussion of politics, religion, or fundraising.
Okay.
We're not setting the group up for argument.
Yep,
so somebody's coming in trying to find their voice, and then somebody says, well, what do you think about this or what do you think about that politically?
Yeah.
You've just invited an argument.
Absolutely.
And somebody who's already squelched and shut down is not going to want to raise a hand, and they're not going to want to find their voice. And the other thing worth noting, they probably won't be back to another meeting.
Yeah, you just disencourage them from participating in the future.
Yeah, and so, people ask, well, what's the metric?
Yeah.
Well, I find that in the workplace, out in society, when people can get up to speak, there's a comfort level that everybody expresses. And they're in a learning environment, too. They're growing at any age and developing.
Yeah. I told you before we started recording that I was going to share a story that might lead into you helping me a little bit. So I'm fairly comfortable with speaking. I do have a little level of anxiety before getting up in front of a group that may impact. But overall, I'm usually pretty comfortable with it. My body does some weird things sometimes, though, and sometimes I can't control it. So here's a story for you. So middle of the pandemic, everything was remote, and so I did a lot of podcasts like this, webinars, very comfortable. Like it's basically just my head on camera, behind a mic, or sometimes just fully audio. Well, there was a Vistage group that came around, and we were hosting, and they asked me to do a talk on personal branding. I'm like, cool, that's a topic that I'm passionate about. I think everybody needs to have their personal brand and find their voice, so to speak, and then share that with the world. And I had this presentation dialed in. I was not nervous whatsoever. I'm like, I know this content. It was a small group too. And I remember starting, and I started having these weird shallow breaths, and panic started I started paying attention to the content and delivering it. And I started paying attention to my body and what it was doing that I couldn't control. And I almost have like a mini panic attack. I've eventually recovered, but one person, Angela, who's in the room, she knows me well enough. She knew something was going on. I don't know if anybody else could really tell, but I was like having a moment, something I couldn't control. How do you get over something like that? Because that was like there was something underlying that was making me have that in the moment, that my body was just not having it. What is that?
No, you probably were scared. You were frightened.
But I wasn't like leading it into it. So I don't
So
understand.
you were passionate about your topic,
Yeah.
but had you prepared? Had you practiced?
I felt like I did.
Yeah, well, what I do, I prepare a speech. I write it out. I don't read my speeches.
Okay.
What I do is I go to lunches and I go to breakfast and coffee with different people, and I practice different parts of my speech, so I make it conversational. And I also wrap it around a story. People always love hearing about somebody's story.
Yeah.
So even you giving a speech about what you just went through, then you own it.
Yeah, that's true.
And every time I give another speech, I'm recovering more and more of my childhood.
Yeah.
And that's the playful zone.
Yeah. So true. It's funny.
You're being hard on yourself.
I like to laugh about it now because I'm like, I still joke with people. I'm like, I don't know what the heck happened.
Well, that's great. That's absolutely great. Because when you share that with other people,
Makes them feel
it does.
Yeah,
It-
makes
not
them
only
feel
for
comfortable.
yourself, but for the people that you're sharing that with.
That's why, like in leadership, I think it's important to share vulnerability. I think that it's that olive branch of just being able to share a story allows people to connect with you better, and it probably makes them more at ease.
Well, if you're
too.
vulnerable because you're not stiff, you're just opening up, that's authentic.
It's authentic. It's being a real
So
human
being
being.
vulnerable, I feel good enough about myself that I'm okay with being vulnerable.
Yeah. One of the questions we kind of derailed from my plan, but this has been awesome. One of the things I wanted to ask you early on was why in like today's society, maybe more so than in the past, why is speaking and finding our voice so much more important? Because I'm seeing like my kids who are 12 and 10 and they're growing up with technology and it's becoming more and more connected, but less and less human connection. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I read a book called So You Want to Write.
Yeah.
I'm down at Powell's in downtown Portland, and there's a book by Brenda Ueland. It's an autobiography. Whatever you want for yourself, do for yourself. So if your two sons are seeing that you're preparing for a speech, you're practicing.
Yeah.
Hey, let me practice with you about a speech I'm going to be giving in a week or two. They're going to get the idea this is pretty cool stuff. There's a new book out, and I read a lot of books. I'm always looking for some place where I can learn. Carmen Gallo, Gallo, is an author.
Yeah.
Carmen Gallo has written several books, and I've read them all that he's written so far, and they're great books, and it's all about public speaking. One's called Talk Like Ted.
I think I bought it, and I have not read it yet.
Yeah, okay.
I buy a lot of books and don't read them.
Yes.
I read a lot.
That's a great book. That's one of my favorite, my top 10.
Okay, good.
Another book that he's written recently is called The Bezos Blueprint.
I bought that too.
Oh, it's sitting on your shelf.
It's somewhere.
I just gave it to my son who's here. He's a school teacher down in Menlo Park area, Cupertino. And he graduated from Berkeley, Cal Berkeley, and from Stanford both, communication and rhetoric. So he's a public speaker. He has found his voice, and we talk about it frequently, but I gifted him with that book. He's up here for a week because he's out of school right now. And I gave him the pages to read because I'm busy, Dad. So he gave me all the excuses. But I went through the book and I gave 20 pages. Just read these pages. Jeff Bezos says the two things that are must-have skills, they're no longer soft skills, they're must-have skills, are writing skills and speaking skills, presentation skills.
Yep.
So I think a lot of us go through life. I know that I did. You do well, you go through some heartache, you go through some tough stuff at work, at home, and at play. And then you say, okay, I got all this stuff. Now, what else am I going to do to grow myself? And when we grow ourselves, we're growing those around us. Without telling them what to do, we're showing them what to do.
Yeah.
They may or may not subscribe to it. But in today's culture today, I think with all that's going on, I think the more that we work on ourselves to find our voices so we can communicate clearly, people may not agree with us, But if we talk with people rather than at them, we're going to bring them in at least to listen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also what Bezos says in this book that Carmen Gallo wrote, the Bezos Blueprint, interpersonal skills is an outpouring of how we present ourselves and how we're able to speak. And how we bring people in or push people away has to do with our communication style.
Are there particular communication styles that tend to connect better to people?
Well, yes, there's a bunch of books out by a lady who's no longer with us. She passed away in the 1950s. Her name was Karen Horney, Horney, and she talked about the concepts and the psychology of the words we use either bring people in or push people off.
Interesting.
Yes.
And those, I imagine those ideas stay true to today. Like even as the language is changing and evolving constantly, but I imagine there's certain words that push people away versus bring them in.
Yeah, I have two sons. One's in his 40s, one's in his 30s. And I mean, I'm having interesting conversations with them. Very interesting conversations. And they are good communicators.
Yeah.
So people compliment me. You really have two very nice sons. I said, well, thank you. And it happened today up in Corbett. I told this gentleman, I said, yeah, did a good job. Somebody told me I did a good job. I know I did a good job. And the guy said, well, I think MG, your son, did the work. I said, yeah, but I was the leader.
There you go. Yeah, you gave him the ideas and the tools. How do you, when you start, I mean, you work with your kids, obviously, but you've coached and helped people find their voice. What are some of the key things that you've done early on when somebody's like probably experiencing a lot of anxiety around speaking and just in the early stages of this whole process? Like, what are the things to do?
I think finding people that want us to win.
So you're like your inner circle of people who are
a mastermind group or a mentor group. And it so often it takes us most of our life to find the mentor that we know, like, and trust that really wants to show us the way. And for me to find my voice, I had that person that really held me by the hand and supported me through the process of finding my voice. And I'm passing it on like I have to my two sons. And the other thing that I really like about what I'm doing is when I help somebody find their voice, I have a friend forever.
Yeah.
Because the world really opens up.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, like, how is like being a public speaker and even like opening up to people, like, changed your life? And I imagine it's just that. It's like when you open up, you connect better, you have deeper relationships.
I can tell you a story. December last year, I was in Paris, France, where I go frequently, and I went to a law firm. It's the third largest law firm in the world with 80 countries, 160 offices. So I went into this room of about 20 people, and I was invited by this litigator, a good friend of mine. His name is Loic Leroy-Mercier in Paris, and he works at this law firm, Denton's. And I'm in this room with about 20 people, and we're talking, and I told him a story that when I was a young man in my 20s, I someday dreamed of being up on the 5th and 6th floor of one of these office buildings so I could be up doing something that was meaningful. Well, that day has arrived. I'm here. What I know about the law profession, 90% of you don't have your voices, and the ones making all the money can get up and present.
Yeah.
And they litigate really pretty well, and they're great negotiators. And I've had a number of attorneys say, how did you know that? I said, well, I'm talking to people, and I can just feel what's going on. And he said, you're right. 90% of us are really smart. We're able to write, but we're not able to speak. So in our group right now, we have 3 attorneys finding their voices.
I love that. I mean, there's so much untapped potential with people who are great thinkers, great writers, but are quiet and not speaking up in group meetings, in front of teams, or whatever it may be. But we need to unlock that, don't we?
That's right. That's exactly what I'm on to. And I just absolutely love it because it's really expanded my world, and I know expands everybody else's world.
Since you do professional speaking, you like to get up on stage and give, like, tell stories. How do you prepare for that? I would like to get some insights as to how you might, whether it's a few weeks in advance to the day of. I would love to hear your process.
This is for me, it's interesting, and I think it really is a good one. I'm preparing for a speech this last June, 25th of June. It's a Tuesday morning. A few weeks before June 25th, I asked my buddy and a study hall downtown Portland. I said, "Do you have a stamp?" He says, "No, I don't have a stamp." I said, "Oh, I'll have to go home and ask my wife, and this letter will just have to wait." And all of a sudden, a roll of stamps lands right in the middle of my desk. And I go, "Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Where'd these come from?" "Well, it had to come from that guy over there." "Ethan, it wasn't you." "No, no, no. It's this other guy." So I went over and said, "Hi, my name's Terry Beard." He says, "My name's Vincent, blah, blah, blah." And we start talking. He said, "I don't need the stamps. I live in London." I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, my wife lives in Beaverton, but we live in London, but we're here visiting her family." And he says, "I won't need the stamps." I said, "Oh, you're a non-resident member of this club." He said, "Yeah, that's right." So we start talking. Come to find out, he and I don't live too far apart in Paris. So my world's expanded.
Oh, my gosh.
Because I had the gumption to get up and go over and say, "Thank you. I don't need all your stamps, but thank you very much." But I wrote that story out. But I liked it because I was able to talk to him in a way to say, "Hey, I'll help you out. You're fairly new to town. You'd like to meet, you're into real estate. You'd like to meet a commercial real estate guy that knows what's going on, and an accountant that knows taxes and all the costs and all that related to real estate. And then you'd like to meet an attorney." I said, "I got all these people lined up for you." And he said, "That's great." He said, "Oh, that's a good question." Because I'd asked him, "What are you going to do for me?" So I was writing a story, a roll of stamps, "Ask for what you want." And the guy said, Vincent said to me, he said, "That's a very good question. My father introduced his two best friends, and his two best friends made zillions of millions of dollars, but never cut my father into the deal." And he went to his grave with regret because he didn't have what it took to say, "What are you going to do to share with your large S?" So I write all that out. And I'm so passionate about it because there's something about overcoming, because it took me a long time, do a lot of nice things for people, but I just need to feel the vibe that the person is going to be able to come back to me. And I never had so many people in the room when I gave the speech come up to me and say, "That was a great speech, and I really like the message that you have." We're always helping people, but when we need help, it doesn't come our way. We have to learn how to ask for it.
Yeah.
But I write them all out. I practice them at lunches and coffee breaks.
Yeah.
And feel good about it because I don't read a speech. That's called a read along.
Yeah, we don't like those. And if you get off track too or lose your spot,
That's okay.
You freeze
then
up.
Don't correct yourself when it's over.
Tell a story or something.
Yeah, keep on going.
Yeah, that's really good advice. You know, when people, when they're speaking or they want to speak, but maybe they have fears, what are a lot of the fears that you've heard people express that's why they don't speak up or get on stage?
The overriding thing that I hear is, "Well, this is strange. I'm not used to this. I don't usually talk in front of more than 2 or 3 people," which means sitting down at a table and it's sitting in a chair. But I've just learned when I'm speaking, I want to be on my feet. I think we project better. We feel better. But people don't really talk about what drove their speech anxiety, other than something underneath. They got pinched, they got held back, they weren't encouraged. So even in a lot of books out there, find people in the act of doing something good. People just start feeling better about themselves, and when they do, they can encourage other people.
Yeah. What I find, too, is you're always thinking about yourself. I think you're worried about what other people are thinking, but they're also thinking about themselves and how they're feeling in the moment. Like how if they see you on stage, they might not be judging you like you might think they're judging you. They're actually thinking about how what you're saying makes them feel. I think people are just all consumed with themselves in the moment, truthfully. And so we need to get over that.
I think we need to get over capital comparison. Who's got which car? Who's got what house? Who's got the biggest swimming pool? Who's got the second, third home? That's the stuff, I call it.
Yeah.
I think I'm finding out that I'm my own biggest project to work on myself, to grow myself. And I find that the root of that is public speaking and being able to get up and present.
Yeah. So if people who are listening, we've got a lot of HR professionals, leaders, and individual contributors listening to this podcast. If they're like, "Oh yeah, that's me," or "Oh, I would like to bring this to my organization," what are some like really good first steps? You talked about some books, but I think we need reps too. What are some ways to get involved in speaking so that we get comfortable? We learn from the pros that are doing it and other people who might be at the same path we are.
Well, I do know that Carmen Gallo, and I mentioned it in my book, We Owe Each Other 2 Minutes. He's working with Howard Schultz, who used to be with Starbucks and
yeah.
still is,
Yeah.
and Mark Benioff with Salesforce. And he's worked with Steve Jobs, knows Jeff Bezos. That's a C-level suite I'm calling.
Mm-hmm.
But those people taking it through their organization, the closest I've seen it come is with Jeff Bezos' book is written for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's attempting to pass it on to other people. But if anybody wants to get a hold of me to talk about this, I really enjoy it, because one of the things is that people will ask me, what's the metrics? Well, I don't know that I can quantify it, but I can say this. Been with some companies where people say hi to one another because they have the badge. But now when they've been through a speaking group and they feel better about themselves, when they see somebody with a badge down the hall and they're walking by them, they stop and talk to them. So what does that lead to? The next time they need to work together, they know each other.
Yeah.
They can collaborate.
Love that.
So if they're hybrid on a Zoom or a Teams call, if they've been in a room with somebody, they know them better. So I think that's a nice filler.
Yeah.
But I think what's going on with society, we're using Teams and Zoom, but I think we still want to press the flesh.
Yeah. We need to have like breakouts or something
Exactly.
to get into smaller, intimate groups.
But no, I'm available.
Yeah.
And it does make a difference in the culture, and I do have some testimonials.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of those,
Good.
but at the same time, it does make a difference.
Yeah. Terry, who is the best, maybe this top three speakers you've ever seen, whether public figures or somebody that you know that maybe we can get access to and watch how they deliver speeches or a presentation, just so we can learn from the best?
Oh, Winston Churchill is,
Yeah.
he's one of my mentors. He doesn't know it. He left when I graduated from high school, but somebody said about him, one of his aides said, well, Winston, half the people like you and the other half of the people don't like you. And Winston said, it's great. I've got a brand.
Yes.
Okay, great speaker. He prepared for them,
Yep.
didn't read them, but he knew his material. He was passionate about what he was doing. Martin Luther King is absolutely a great speaker. And another one's Ronald Reagan, a great storyteller of all time. And one of these days, I want to hear this guy, Carmen Gallo, speak. I've read his books, and I know he does speak, but I'd like to see him speak. He's a professor at Harvard University, and I know he goes all over the world with his work, but I'd like to hear him speak.
There's probably some YouTube stuff out there that we can check out.
Yes.
Well, Terry, your book is called We Owe Each Other 2 Minutes, Transform Your Life Through Public Speaking. I appreciate all the storytelling and the tidbits. Like, it just makes for this content to stick even more. And I've learned a lot. I know I need to get my butt out and start speaking a little bit more and stop being behind this mic all the time. But just really good stuff. And I hope that people will connect with you. I think you're up to some really good stuff. What's the best way to reach out to you?
My email, which I know
We'll put it in the show notes for sure.
The other one is that we have the speakersalliance.com, and there's FYV, Find Your Voice, FYVcommunications.com. But here in Portland, Oregon, or somebody can come in across the country.
We got people all over the world listening to
all
this.
Right. That's great. And I think that they can come in on a hybrid meeting because we use Teams.
Yeah, great.
Oh, yeah. It's fun. We have people who drive in from the Dalles, Oregon.
Yeah.
2-hour drive every
incredible.
Tuesday morning for a 7:15 meeting.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Coffee better be hot.
Yes.
My guest today has been Terry Beard, the author of We Owe Each Other 2 Minutes, Transform Your Life Through Public Speaking. Terry, what a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much, Brendan. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.